It was a cold, rainy evening when Georgina first met Edward. She had been sitting in the corner of a small coffee shop, her favorite place to escape the world, when the door opened, and a man entered. The wind howled behind him, sending the rain splattering against the window. He shook his umbrella, the water dripping from the tips of his hair as he walked toward the counter. Something about him caught her attention. His eyes were soft but filled with a sadness that seemed to match the gloomy weather outside. Georgina couldn't explain why, but she felt drawn to him. Edward ordered a coffee, then looked around the room, his gaze briefly meeting hers. He smiled, a small, sad smile, before walking to the only empty seat in the shop, the one across from her. For some reason, Georgina didn't feel nervous, though she usually did in the presence of strangers. There was something comforting about him, despite the melancholy that hung around him like a fog. After a while, he looked up at her again, this time as if searching for something in her face. His voice was low and quiet when he spoke. "Do you mind if I sit here?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat. She shook her head. "Of course not." They sat. For a few minutes, neither said anything, the sound of rain tapping on the window the only noise in the room. Eventually, Edward spoke again. "I'm sorry to intrude. It's just that I needed to be somewhere quiet for a moment," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. Georgina nodded, sensing there was more to his words than what he was willing to say. "I understand. Sometimes, it's nice to just sit in silence, away from everything." Edward's eyes met hers again, and she saw the vulnerability there. It made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. There was a deep pain behind those eyes, a longing that seemed endless. And in that moment, she wanted to help him, even if she didn't know how. "I'm Georgina," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Edward," he replied, his lips curving into that small, sad smile again. They sat together, and time seemed to stretch out in the silence. They didn't need words to fill the space, the air between them was full of understanding, like they both knew that sometimes, all you could do was wait. Days turned into weeks, and Georgina found herself returning to that same coffee shop. Every time, Edward was there. They became something like a routine. A quiet understanding passed between them with every glance, every shared smile. Neither of them rushed to speak about their lives. It was as if they both knew that there were some things you couldn't rush, that certain things needed time, needed space to be fully understood. But Georgina knew something was troubling Edward. Every time he spoke about his past, there was a heaviness in his voice. It was as if he carried the weight of something long lost, and it made her heart ache. She wanted to ask him more about it, but she also understood that some people couldn't talk about their pain so easily. One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the windows, Edward spoke in a soft voice. "There's someone I've been waiting for. A long time. I don't think I can ever stop waiting." Georgina felt her heart stop for a moment. His words hung in the air, thick with emotion. She didn't say anything at first. There was a part of her that wanted to pull back, to shield herself from the inevitable pain that she sensed in his words. But there was also a part of her that understood. Love was like that, fragile, yet unyielding. "Who are you waiting for?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My wife," he said, and the sadness in his eyes deepened. "She was everything to me. And then, one day, she was gone." Georgina didn't need to ask what happened. She could see it in his face, the way the past haunted him, the way the absence of someone who once meant everything left a hole that nothing could fill. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know." Edward shook his head. "You couldn't have known. I didn't come here to burden you with my pain. But sometimes, I can't help but think of her, every day, and I keep waiting. I don't know why. It's foolish, maybe, but I don't think I can let go." Georgina reached across the table, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently placed it over his. The simple gesture was all she could offer in the face of his overwhelming sorrow. "I understand," she whispered. "I know what it's like to wait for something, or someone. But you can't wait forever, Edward. Life moves on, even when we don't want it to." He looked at her, his eyes softening a little, though the sadness still lingered. "I don't know if I can ever stop waiting." Georgina didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing: sometimes, love required sacrifice. Sometimes, it was about holding on to someone, even if they were no longer there. "I won't tell you to stop waiting," she said quietly. "But I think, maybe you need to let go, just a little. Maybe then you can start to heal." Edward didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at their hands, resting together on the table. His grip tightened for a moment, then relaxed. Finally, he nodded, though there was a tear in his eye. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said softly. Georgina squeezed his hand, offering him the comfort of her embrace, even if it wasn't a physical one. "You don't have to be," she said. "You just need to try." Over the months that followed, Georgina and Edward's friendship deepened. There were still days when he seemed lost in the past, when the weight of his memories would pull him under. On those days, Georgina would sit quietly by his side, not pushing him to talk, but just offering him her presence. She, too, had her own ghosts. There were moments when she would think of lost love, of things that had slipped through her fingers like water. But she knew that the only way to heal was to face the pain, not run from it. And so, they waited together. One cold evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall outside, Georgina asked Edward a question she had been thinking about for a long time. "Do you think love is worth the pain it causes?" she asked, her voice soft. Edward looked at her for a long time before answering. His gaze was filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "Yes," he said simply. "Love is worth it, even when it hurts. Because without love, what else do we have? What else is there to live for?" Georgina smiled sadly. "I think I understand." A year had passed since that first meeting. It had been a year of quiet healing, of shared silences and moments of understanding. Edward still missed his wife, still carried the weight of his past with him. But now, when he looked at Georgina, he no longer saw just his sorrow. He saw something else, a quiet strength, a reminder that love didn't always have to be about holding on to what was lost. "I'm not waiting anymore," he said one day, as they sat together in the coffee shop, the rain outside a steady hum. Georgina looked at him, her heart swelling with a bittersweet joy. "What do you mean?" I think I've let go. Not of her, but of the need to keep waiting for something that's gone," Edward explained, his voice filled with a quiet sense of peace. "I can carry her memory with me, but I don't have to wait for her anymore." Tears welled up in Georgina's eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she simply reached out and took his hand in hers, offering him the one thing that had always been there, the power of an embrace, of holding on when words couldn't say everything. And in that moment, Georgina realized that sometimes love wasn't just about waiting. Sometimes, it was about learning to let go, about finding peace in the spaces between the pain. She had been waiting, too, waiting for something to heal, waiting for herself to understand that love wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about moving forward, step by painful step, knowing that the people you loved would always be with you, in your heart. And so, they sat there together, in the quiet warmth of the coffee shop, knowing that the waiting had finally come to an end. Not because the pain was gone, but because they had learned to embrace it together.